I'm Mr. MegaManFan. This is the PC Engine Files, and you're looking at Spin Pair, a Media Rings made game, which is a very unique take on the puzzle genre. Although at first, I wasn't entirely convinced that it was unique because this opening selection screen with Type A, Type B music immediately made me think of Tetris, and in fact, it set up the wrong expectations of a line dropping puzzle game in my head, which I ultimately had to overcome. Let me quote a little from the PC Engine website, the software Bible that I frequent. It's pcengine.co.uk, and they had this to say about Spin Pair. It might look like a typical drop the block puzzle game, but there's a twist to it. Instead of just matching block colors, you also have to fill in the blocks by rotating their full half so it matches the empty half. As levels progress, blocks represent different things like plants, animals, etc. for variety. There are several modes of play, including a story mode and a link-up mode. Now at first, I had no idea about any of that because I did what I usually do, which Ryan often complains about when he watches Genesis does. I went into this blind. I didn't read any instructions ahead of time. But since I don't have a physical copy of the game, and even if I did, the instructions would be in Japanese, I'm not so sure that would have helped. So, for something like a PC Engine game, I really do think trial and error is best. And what I was trying to do at first, to my error, was to match up the colors, and that didn't seem to be working. I thought, maybe if I get 2, 3, or 4 in a row, that will work. And then I was trying to match the shapes and was having equally little success with that. And I wasn't quite getting the whole take one half and fill in the other half thing. I do it by accident, like I just did there, instead of doing it on purpose. And I quickly wound up filling up the screen without realizing what the hell was going on. So, score one for the game designers for being smarter than me, because I didn't get the concept at all. But as one can do when they're playing a game such as Spin Pair, if you persist and keep trying, you can start to glean what to do given enough time. So this first run was a complete fail, but in the second run, I did start to pick up on the whole idea of what to do. Now, information about Spin Pair is few and far between, but there is another article about it at Retro Video Gaming, so I'm going to tell you what they had to say about it. Seriously play. I revisit a game you should seriously play, namely Spin Pair. Spin Pair is a hue card game, so you don't need the CD unit or a Turbo Duo to play it. It is a puzzle game where you have shapes falling down which you can flip or move left or right. However, in Spin Pair, the shapes are very different and it makes the game complex. You can switch places of the pair of shapes falling down, but with the second button, you can also rotate the contents of those shapes. So basically, what you need to do is get half of a shape to fill up the opposite half of a shape in the same type/color. That is a very good explanation, so kudos to Stop X Whispering for their write-up of Spin Pair on retrovideogaming.com. Retro-video-gaming, I should say. I assume they had to do it that way because the original was probably already taken by somebody else. And the Video Game Den has a write-up on PC Engine as well. So, at least the PC Engine Bible and the Video Game Den, the two that I normally go to for information about obscure PC Engine games, both have write-ups for it. Giant Bomb does as well. Maybe I shouldn't have said few and far between. What I meant is few mainstream and far between, because you're not going to find an entry for this on the English language Wikipedia, and you're not going to find a lot of people playing this game on YouTube, although there is a long play video of it. What I'm saying is that outside of PC Engine enthusiasts like my friends Michelle Mayhem and Sarumaru and Baron Corbin in Japan, just kidding bro, it's Corbin in Japan, but couldn't resist making a WWE SmackDown joke. But all kidding aside, their affection for PC Engine games makes games like this not obscure to them, but very obscure to the general populace. Which is why I do this series, because I want more people to know about PC Engine games, and games that should have come to the TurboGrafx in the United States if it hadn't run fourth in a 3-horse race between Atari, Sega, and Nintendo. So the PC Engine's North American counterpart was kind of screwed from the very beginning, because even though Atari was running a distant third, they were still running in third, so they were able to crowd out what little market share that the TurboGrafx could hope for, and by the time they released the Turbo Duo here, it was pretty much too little too late. So history records the way it went, but the nice thing about playing with things like the Super SD System 3 and card converters for a TurboGrafx 16 or an EverDrive or emulation, whatever you do, you can still experience these games. They aren't lost to history. That's another thing that I don't often talk about on the PC Engine files, but I do think it's important to bring this up every now and then. Emulation is important for preservation, because some of these games, if the physical copies stop working, emulation is going to be the only way that future generations will get to experience these games and see this part of history. And maybe some people don't care about that. Maybe some people are just perfectly content to let history disappear and not be recorded, and nobody will know what went on back in the pioneering days of home consoles and video game systems. Because that's what I consider the mid to late 70s, the 1980s, and the early 90s to be. I consider that like the pioneering era. The 70s in particular, the 80s is when it rose, crashed, and then rose like a phoenix from the ashes again. And the 90s is when it really started to take hold as smaller players dropped out. Other people tried to step in and grab a piece of the ever-growing pie and either ended up with a tiny slice or none at all. And bigger players like Sony got into the mix, and we really saw things heat up in the console wars between first Nintendo and Sega, and then the two of them against Sony, and then Sega ultimately lost that fight. But then Microsoft entered and it became a 3-man race again, so kind of setting the precedent for the way things have been is that there have always been at least 2, if not 3 major players in the market. Now that I got the concept down, I decided that was a good time to game over it and start fresh, playing it knowing exactly what I'm doing this time, matching one half with the other, and creating pairs by spinning, which makes this game's title unintentionally or intentionally apt. I mean, maybe spin pair was just the words that sounded good, but it does actually describe the gameplay quite well, so I'm going to assume, without knowing this for a fact, that they meant it literally when they called it spin pair. As for pricing, that's always going to be a subject of interest. Can you get a physical copy of this game for a reasonable price? With PC Engine games, that's never a guarantee, because sometimes you can find ones that are less well known that don't go for very much, but they might not be very good. Sometimes the lesser known ones that are a little good go for huge amounts because they're a short print run. And sometimes decent games go for decent prices because they're not super known, they're not super unknown, but there are plenty of copies out there. So it's always an interesting mix trying to find out what goes for what. Spin pair, you can get loose for $7 plus shipping from at least one seller I've found. $8 plus shipping brings it up to about $14. $11.68 complete in the box with $6 shipping. $14 with $4 shipping straight from Japan for that one. So it seems like you're going to pay anywhere from, at a minimum, $10 to at most 20, depending on whether you want it loose or complete. With shipping, it's going to bring it over $10, but you can get it for under 20. So Spin Pair is what I would consider an affordable game for TurboGrafx/PC Engine collectors. Not a bargain, not super duper cheap, but definitely not on the high end that things like Koryun and Sapphire go for. Those highly desirable games that every collector seems to want and that there are very few copies of floating around. So Spin Pair would be a decent place to jump in, especially if you like puzzle games. And this one, I'd say is pretty good. Once you get the hang of it, the twisting and the filling the halves and the matching the shapes with the other shapes and getting the combos, which occasionally you can do when you match a half together and it rolls across to knock out other things. That's very satisfying. It's got a Puyo Pop kind of chaining to it that you can get into quite easily. So I would say this is worth taking the time to try an emulation and definitely worth looking for a copy of, especially at the current price it commands. If you don't like puzzle games, well, too bad. Then this won't be for you. And if you try playing it like it's Tetris, well, then you'll do just about as well as I did the first run of this game that you saw. But if you give it a chance, and you learn the playstyle, and you're into puzzle games, Spin Pair has something to offer. It's not the best, it's not the worst, but at least it didn't have to curse to get the point across, to quote Q-Tip in A Tribe Called Quest. So, I say, this is just my opinion, don't have to take my word for it, I say Spin Pair would be a game worth owning. And I may consider picking up a physical copy of this one myself, because it does go for reasonable prices. So I'm going to look for a few of my favorite sellers on eBay, see if any of them put up a listing for it, and probably lump it in with the nice assortment of Japanese games, because when I get imports, I like to maximize the value of the shipping, so I tend to get 5 or 6 games and for several different consoles and some weird stuff just to amuse or pique my curiosity that I have no idea what it is. I'm Mr. MegaManFan, thanks for watching.